The marble columns of the Capitol hearing room seemed to vibrate with tension as Justice Brett Kavanaugh's laughter echoed through the chamber for what felt like the 100th time in 10 minutes. The sound was sharp, almost crystalline, cutting through the heavy atmosphere like a blade through silk. Camera flashes illuminated his face in stroboscopic bursts, capturing each moment of his theatrical performance for the packed gallery of journalists, congressional staffers, and curious onlookers. "Mr. Patel," Kavanaugh said, his voice dripping with condescension as he leaned back in his witness chair, "perhaps you should consider obtaining a proper legal education before attempting to lecture the Supreme Court on matters of judicial ethics." His words drew chuckles from several supporters scattered throughout the room, their approval rippling through the chamber like applause at a comedy show. Kash Patel sat motionless at the questioning table, his dark eyes fixed on the justice with an intensity that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His hands remained perfectly still on the polished wooden surface, not a single finger twitching despite the mounting provocation. The contrast between the two men was striking, Kavanaugh animated and theatrical, Patel as still as a statue carved from stone. "Your Honor," Patel began, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to choosing words with surgical precision, "my question was quite simple. Can you explain to this committee why judicial ethics guidelines appear to have guidelines?" Kavanaugh interrupted, his laughter now taking on an edge that made several congressmen shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Mr. Patel, the Supreme Court has operated under time-tested principles for over 2 centuries. We don't need guidance from someone whose entire legal experience consists of prosecuting minor federal cases and writing memos." The gallery stirred with murmurs of both approval and disapproval. Senator Patricia Williams, the committee chairwoman, raised her gavel but hesitated to strike it, sensing that the exchange was building towards something significant. Her weathered face bore the expression of someone who had witnessed countless political theater performances but recognized that this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. Patel's response came without a pause, his tone unchanged despite the insult. "I appreciate your perspective, Justice Kavanaugh. However, my role here today is to discuss the coordination between federal law enforcement and the judicial branch. Surely you understand the importance of transparency in government operations?" "Transparency?" Kavanaugh's voice rose slightly, his amusement taking on a harder quality. "Mr. Patel, the FBI director's role is to investigate crimes and follow leads, not to question the integrity of sitting Supreme Court justices. Perhaps you need a refresher on the separation of powers?" The comment drew more laughter from his supporters, but seasoned political observers in the room began to notice something else: the way Patel's shoulders had straightened almost imperceptibly, the manner in which his breathing had become even more controlled. These were the subtle signs of a predator preparing to strike, though most in the room remained focused on Kavanaugh's performance. Representative Michael Chen, a junior member of the committee, leaned forward with obvious concern. "Justice Kavanaugh, while we appreciate your appearance here today, I think Mr. Patel's questions deserve serious consideration rather than what, Congressman?" Kavanaugh turned his attention to Chen with the same theatrical flair he had been displaying all morning. "Rather than the honest reaction of someone who has devoted his entire career to upholding the Constitution? I find it amusing that an FBI director nominee thinks he can waltz in here and suggest that Supreme Court justices need to be more transparent about their decision-making processes." The word amusing hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Kavanaugh's supporters in the gallery began to applaud, their enthusiasm growing as they sensed their champion gaining momentum. The sound filled the chamber, bouncing off the ornate ceiling and creating an almost carnival-like atmosphere that seemed wildly inappropriate for the solemnity of a congressional hearing. But something was changing in the room's dynamic. The more experienced journalists present, those who had covered Washington for decades, began to lean forward in their seats. They recognized the signs of a political ambush in development, though they couldn't yet identify which direction it would come from. The way Patel remained unnaturally calm under such provocation suggested either exceptional self-control or exceptional preparation. "Justice Kavanaugh," Patel said, his voice cutting through the applause with the efficiency of a scalpel, "I want to ensure I understand your position correctly. Are you stating that the FBI should have no oversight role regarding potential ethical violations within the federal judiciary?" Kavanaugh's laughter reached its peak intensity. "Mr. Patel, that's exactly what I'm saying. The FBI director should know his place, and that place is most certainly not pointing fingers at the 9 justices of the Supreme Court of the United States. He gestured broadly with his arms, playing to his audience like a seasoned performer. The very suggestion is not just inappropriate, it's laughable. The chamber erupted in a mixture of cheers and boos, creating a cacophony that Senator Williams finally felt compelled to address. She struck her gavel repeatedly, the sharp crack of wood against wood barely audible above the din. Order. We will have order in this chamber. But Kavanaugh seemed energized by the chaos. He stood slightly in his chair, his face flushed with the excitement of public performance. Perhaps, Mr. Patel, you should focus on the very real challenges facing federal law enforcement instead of creating imaginary ethical dilemmas for institutions that have served this nation with distinction for generations. The moment stretched like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. Patel's eyes never left Kavanaugh's face, studying every micro-expression, every gesture, every tell that might reveal the man behind the performance. The silence from the nominees' table had become almost oppressive, a void that seemed to absorb all the noise and energy from the rest of the room. Then, in a movement so subtle that many in the gallery missed it entirely, Patel's right hand shifted slightly toward the leather briefcase at his feet. The motion was barely perceptible, lasting no more than 2 seconds, but it was enough to catch the attention of the sharp-eyed journalists in the front row. Something about the gesture suggested preparation, purpose, inevitability. Justice Kavanaugh, Patel said, his voice now carrying a different quality, still calm, still measured, but with an undertone that made the hair on the back of several necks stand up. The laughter in the room began to die down as people unconsciously responded to the shift in atmosphere. Before we continue this discussion about the proper role of federal law enforcement, Kavanaugh leaned forward, his confidence radiating like heat from a furnace. Yes, Mr. Patel? The silence that followed was profound. Even the ever-present hum of the building's ventilation system seemed to fade into nothingness. The hundreds of people packed into the chamber held their breath without realizing it, sensing that they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered long after the hearing transcripts were filed away. Patel's hand moved again, this time more deliberately, reaching toward his briefcase with the methodical precision of a surgeon selecting an instrument. The sound of the leather clasp opening was audible throughout the chamber, sharp and final as the snap of a trap closing. Justice Kavanaugh, Patel repeated, his voice now carrying the weight of absolute certainty, do you happen to recall your meeting on March 15th? The laughter stopped. Not gradually, not with the slow fade of natural conversation, but instantly and completely, as if someone had thrown a switch that controlled all sound in the universe. Kavanaugh's face, which had been animated with theatrical confidence just moments before, became a mask of stone. His eyes, which had been sparkling with amusement, suddenly seemed to darken. The transformation was so complete and so sudden that it sent a ripple of unease through the entire chamber. Journalists who had been casually taking notes suddenly snapped to attention, their professional instincts screaming that they were witnessing the moment when everything changed. Congressional staffers stopped their whispered conversations and focused entirely on the 2 men at the center of the drama. Senator Williams felt her pulse quicken as she recognized the unmistakable signs of a political earthquake beginning to rumble beneath the surface of what had seemed like routine political theater. The gavel in her hand suddenly felt heavy, useless against whatever force was about to be unleashed. Kavanaugh's mouth opened slightly, as if to speak, but no words came. For the first time since the hearing began, he appeared to be at a complete loss for words. The silence stretched on, becoming more uncomfortable with each passing second, until it felt like the very air in the chamber had become thick and difficult to breathe. In that moment of absolute quiet, with hundreds of eyes focused on the 2 men locked in their silent battle of wills, everyone present understood that they had just witnessed the end of one story and the beginning of another entirely different one. The laughter had died, and something much more serious had taken its place. The silence that had fallen over the chamber after Patel's question felt like a living thing, pressing against the eardrums of everyone present. Justice Kavanaugh's face had transformed from theatrical confidence to something approaching genuine concern, though he fought to maintain his composure. His hands, which had been gesturing expansively just moments before, now gripped the edges of his chair with white-knuckled intensity. I meet with hundreds of people, Mr. Patel, Kavanaugh said finally, his voice lacking the booming authority it had carried throughout the morning. You'll need to be more specific if you expect me to recall every appointment from my calendar. But even as he spoke, something fundamental had shifted in the room's atmosphere. The journalists who had been casually documenting what they assumed would be routine political posturing suddenly straightened in their seats, pens poised over notebooks like weapons ready to strike. The gallery, which had been buzzing with partisan energy, fell into an expectant hush that seemed to magnify every small sound, the rustle of papers, the quiet hum of recording equipment, the almost inaudible whisper of the ventilation system. Patel reached into his briefcase with deliberate slowness, his movements as precise as a watchmaker handling delicate components. The leather case opened with a soft snap that somehow managed to echo through the vast chamber, and he withdrew a manila folder marked with official government seals. The red lettering across the top was clearly visible from the gallery: classified, authorized personnel only. March 15, 2:30 p.m., Patel began, his voice carrying the mechanical precision of someone reading from official documentation. Your private chambers, Justice Kavanaugh. Present were yourself and Marcus Thornfield of Strategic Solutions Consulting Group. Kavanaugh's attempt at casual dismissal came out strained. Strategic Solutions, yes, they're a legitimate consulting firm. They work with numerous government officials on policy analysis. Indeed they do, Patel agreed, turning a page in the folder with theatrical deliberation. Mr. Thornfield's firm has quite an extensive client list. Very international in scope. The way Patel emphasized the word international sent a ripple of unease through the congressional panel. Representative Chen leaned forward, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. Senator Williams found herself unconsciously holding her breath, her experienced political instincts warning her that they were approaching dangerous territory. Patel continued reading from the file, his tone never varying from its professional neutrality. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. Discussion topics included pending Supreme Court cases, specifically Miller v. State of Texas and Commonwealth v. Industrial Holdings LLC. Those cases are public record, Kavanaugh interjected, but his voice carried a defensive edge that hadn't been there before. There's nothing improper about discussing legal precedents. Certainly not, Patel agreed with what might have been the ghost of a smile. However, the conversation also touched on what Mr. Thornfield described as alternative outcomes for these cases. He was quite specific about the financial benefits that certain adjustments might produce for his clients. The word adjustments hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Several committee members exchanged glances, their faces reflecting a growing understanding that they were witnessing something far more significant than routine oversight questioning. The gallery had fallen so quiet that the soft clicking of camera shutters sounded like distant thunder. Kavanaugh's composure was beginning to crack around the edges. His confident posture had given way to a rigid alertness, like a man suddenly aware that he was standing in a minefield. Mr. Patel, I hope you're not suggesting that a Supreme Court justice would ever compromise his judicial independence. Such accusations are not only false but bordering on what, Justice Kavanaugh? Patel interrupted, his calm tone contrasting sharply with Kavanaugh's rising agitation. I'm simply reading from official documentation. Would you prefer that I continue? The question was clearly rhetorical, but Kavanaugh seemed unable to formulate a response. His legal training, which had served him through decades of complex litigation and confirmation hearings, appeared to have deserted him entirely. He reached for the water glass in front of him with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. Patel turned another page, the rustle of paper unnaturally loud in the hushed chamber. The March 16 follow-up communication is particularly interesting. A phone call placed from your personal device to Mr. Thornfield at 2:47 p.m., lasting 8 minutes and 33 seconds. Phone calls are not crimes, Mr. Patel, Kavanaugh managed, though his voice lacked conviction. Of course not, Patel replied. Though the content of this particular conversation was quite enlightening. Mr. Thornfield's clients were very interested in ensuring favorable outcomes for their pending litigation. He mentioned specific dollar amounts that could be redirected to support judicial operations. The euphemism was clear to everyone in the room, but Patel's careful language kept the accusations in the realm of implication rather than direct accusation. Senator Williams gripped her gavel tighter, sensing that they were approaching a point of no return but uncertain whether she should intervene or allow the drama to continue unfolding. This is preposterous, Kavanaugh said, but his protest sounded hollow even to his own ears. "You're describing routine conversations about judicial funding and court operations." Patel reached into his briefcase again, this time withdrawing a second folder, thicker than the first and bearing even more official seals. "Justice Kavanaugh, I think it's important for this committee to understand the full scope of our investigation." The word investigation dropped into the chamber like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled crowd. Journalists began typing frantically on their devices, while congressional staffers hurried toward the exits with their phones pressed to their ears. The story was breaking in real time, and everyone present understood they were witnessing history in the making. "What investigation?" Kavanaugh demanded, his careful composure finally beginning to fracture. "The FBI has no authority to investigate sitting Supreme Court justices without proper authorization," Patel finished. "Which we obtained through the appropriate channels when Mr. Thornfield's activities came to our attention during an unrelated inquiry into foreign influence operations." The phrase "foreign influence operations" sent a jolt of electricity through the room. This was no longer about simple judicial ethics or domestic political maneuvering. The implications were far more serious, touching on national security and the fundamental integrity of American institutions. Representative Chin stood up suddenly, his face pale. "Mr. Chairman, I think we need to consider moving this discussion to a classified setting." "If we're talking about foreign intelligence matters, sit down, Congressman," Patel said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "The American people have a right to hear this." Kavanaugh was now visibly perspiring, despite the chamber's carefully controlled temperature. His earlier theatrical confidence had been replaced by the desperate alertness of a man watching his world collapse in real time. "Mr. Patel, I demand to know the legal basis for any surveillance of a Supreme Court justice." Patel opened the second folder with the same deliberate precision he had shown throughout the hearing. "Justice Kavanaugh, when Mr. Thornfield's communications were intercepted during our monitoring of suspected foreign agents, your name appeared with concerning frequency." The revelation hit the chamber like a physical force. The carefully maintained decorum of the congressional hearing dissolved as representatives began talking over each other, journalists shouted questions, and the gallery erupted in a mixture of gasps and exclamations. Senator Williams struck her gavel repeatedly, the sharp cracks echoing through the chaos like gunshots, but the sound was swallowed by the rising tumult. "Foreign agents?" Kavanaugh's voice cracked slightly on the words. He attempted to stand, his movements jerky and uncontrolled, but his legs seemed unsteady beneath him. "This is completely fabricated. I demand to speak with legal counsel immediately." "By all means, Justice Kavanaugh," Patel replied, his calm demeanor providing a stark contrast to the pandemonium around him. "However, I believe this committee deserves to hear the evidence before we adjourn." The word evidence cut through the noise like a blade through silk. The chamber began to quiet as people realized they were about to witness something unprecedented in American political history. Even Kavanaugh's supporters in the gallery seemed frozen in their seats, uncertain whether to defend their champion or distance themselves from what appeared to be an unfolding catastrophe. Patel withdrew a small digital device from his briefcase, its presence somehow more menacing than all the classified folders combined. "These are authenticated recordings of telephone conversations between Justice Kavanaugh and various individuals identified as foreign intelligence operatives." "That's impossible," Kavanaugh whispered, but his protest lacked any conviction. His face had gone ashen, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool temperature of the chamber. "March 17, 4:15 p.m., Patel announced, pressing a button on the device. "A conversation lasting 12 minutes with an individual identified by our intelligence services as a senior operative from a hostile foreign power." The quality of the recording was crystal clear, and Kavanaugh's voice filled the chamber with damning clarity. "The Miller case can be influenced, but the price has gone up. $2 million, transferred through the usual channels, and I can guarantee the outcome your clients need." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The gallery exploded in shocked exclamations while congressional members sat in stunned silence. Several journalists were already rushing toward the exits, their stories writing themselves as they ran. The magnitude of what they were witnessing, a sitting Supreme Court justice apparently selling judicial decisions to foreign powers, was almost too large to comprehend. Kavanaugh lurched to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. "This recording is fabricated. It's a complete fabrication designed to destroy me." But even as he protested, his voice carried the hollow ring of desperate denial. The recording had been too clear, too obviously authentic, to dismiss as mere technical trickery. His legal team, seated behind him, appeared to be in a state of shock, their whispered consultations taking on an increasingly frantic quality. Patel continued playing excerpts from various conversations, each one more damaging than the last. The recordings revealed a systematic pattern of judicial influence peddling that stretched back months, involving multiple cases and enormous sums of money. The foreign connections were undeniable, the evidence overwhelming. "Stop this!" Kavanaugh shouted, his composure completely shattered. "You have no right to conduct illegal surveillance on a Supreme Court justice." "Justice Kavanaugh," Patel replied, his voice cutting through the noise with surgical precision, "these recordings were obtained during lawful surveillance of foreign intelligence operatives. Your communications with these individuals were incidental to that investigation." The legal implications were staggering. If Patel was correct, then the FBI had not targeted Kavanaugh directly but had captured his conversations while monitoring foreign agents. The surveillance would be completely legal, and the evidence would be admissible in any subsequent legal proceedings. The chamber had fallen into an almost supernatural quiet, broken only by the soft whir of recording equipment and the distant sound of sirens outside the Capitol building. News of the hearing had clearly reached the outside world, and the media circus was already beginning to gather. Senator Williams finally found her voice. "Mr. Patel, are you prepared to state under oath that these recordings are authentic and were obtained through legal means?" "Yes, Madam Chairman," Patel replied without hesitation. "Every piece of evidence presented today has been verified through multiple independent sources and obtained in full compliance with federal surveillance statutes." Kavanaugh sank back into his chair, the fight seeming to drain out of him like air from a punctured balloon. His earlier laughter now seemed like an echo from another lifetime, a relic from a world where he still possessed the power and prestige of his office. The transformation was complete and irreversible. The moment stretched into eternity, pregnant with the weight of history being made. Then, in the absolute silence of the chamber, Patel delivered his final blow with the precise timing of a master executioner. "Justice Kavanaugh," he said, his words falling into the silence like drops of ice water, "the only thing that's truly amusing here is that you believe the FBI wasn't listening." The phrase hit with the force of a physical blow. Kavanaugh's face went from ashen to gray, and for a moment it seemed as though he might collapse entirely. The irony was devastating. The man who had spent the morning mocking federal law enforcement had been undone by the very surveillance capabilities he had dismissed so cavalierly. But then, in a moment that would be replayed countless times in the days to come, something extraordinary happened. Kavanaugh began to laugh again. It started as a low chuckle, barely audible above the ambient noise of the chamber. But it grew steadily stronger, more manic, until it filled the room with its hollow, broken sound. It was not the confident laughter of the morning, but something far more disturbing, the laughter of a man whose world had collapsed so completely that his mind had begun to fracture under the strain. "You think him the only one?" Kavanaugh asked between fits of hysterical laughter. "You think the other 8 justices are clean? You think this goes no further than me?" The implications of his words sent a chill through the chamber that had nothing to do with the building's air conditioning. If Kavanaugh was suggesting that the corruption extended throughout the Supreme Court, then the constitutional crisis they were witnessing was far larger than anyone had imagined. Patel's expression never changed, but something flickered behind his eyes, perhaps recognition, perhaps concern. He had come to the hearing expecting to expose one corrupt justice, but Kavanaugh's breakdown was revealing the possibility of something much more extensive and dangerous. "Justice Kavanaugh," Patel said carefully, "are you suggesting that other members of the court are involved in similar activities?" Kavanaugh's laughter reached a crescendo before cutting off abruptly. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man with nothing left to lose. "Mr. Patel, you have no idea what you've just started. You think you've won something here today, but you've merely pulled on a thread that's going to unravel everything." The words hung in the air like a prophecy, heavy with implications that no one in the chamber wanted to contemplate. Security personnel began moving toward Kavanaugh as his behavior became increasingly erratic, but he seemed oblivious to their approach. "The funny thing," Kavanaugh continued, his voice taking on a sing-song quality that was deeply unsettling, "is that you think you can control what happens next. But you can't. Nobody can. You've opened a door that can never be closed again." With those final words, security reached him, and Justice Brett Kavanaugh was quietly but firmly escorted from the chamber, his broken laughter echoing off the marble walls until the heavy doors closed behind him. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. In the space of 2 hours, the foundation of American justice had been shaken to its core, and everyone present understood that nothing would ever be the same again. Patel sat motionless at his table, his classified folders closed and secured, watching as the implications of what had just transpired began to sink in around the chamber. He had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations, but Kavanaugh's final words suggested that the victory might prove to be more costly than anyone could have imagined. The hearing was over, but the real consequences were just beginning.